Now, we just talked about how to export two different parts of your database, the schema and the content, into two different dump files, and then add them to version control. But how often should you be updating these database exports? Now, again, on most projects, you're not going to be exporting the content once the site goes live because it just takes up too much space, although you may decide on different rules depending on what your needs are. But at the very bare minimum, even if you're just exporting the schema, you should probably create a new revision of your database export every time you make a new release to production. This will enable your developers to rapidly update their development environment to be able to work on production-level bugs that need to be fixed rapidly. Now, most of the time, this will be the only time where you'll be making exports. The reason is that these exports are coming from production, and so the production database configuration probably isn't going to change between one release and the next. The purpose of a release is to batch together a set of changes and release them all at once after you've had a chance to test them. So in between releases, there probably shouldn't be any configuration changes at all that need to make it into a database export. However, you might find it useful to create a release from a development copy of a database, as long as somewhere along the lines it includes the latest release as the parent. And if you're working on the develop branch, this always will. But it's important to mark these database exports differently. For example, when you make an export from production when there's a new release, you should probably mention the tag of the release inside of the commit message. And then when you make an export from a development site, then you need to mention inside of the comment what it relates to, what commit version it's associated with, and possibly some kind of list of the configuration changes that were made in this release. Now, most of the time, you're probably not going to use a version control dump in order to create regular backups of your database. Part of the reason is that you would need to include the entire database, and that can get pretty big as your site begins to grow. But secondly, if you imagine all of the commit messages that a regular database dump would leave behind, it would get a little messy when you looked at the log and you tried to track what changes were made when. For most production sites, database backups are being made on at least a daily basis, if not an hourly or bi-hourly basis. So alongside any revisions that you make to the database dumps inside of version control, you should also have a parallel set of backups that are being made outside of version control that are simply marked with the date so that you can easily roll back to a particular version of the database if your production database becomes corrupt for some reason. There are some nice tools out there to do this. A lot of hosts offer this kind of backup as part of their package, but you can also use the backup and migrate module to export not only your database, but a copy of your code that is associated with that database. So it's very easy to roll back to a particular time period in your site's history.